It's a little cliched to say that it's hard to believe 30 years have passed since Quake released, but it feels like just yesterday that I took a look at a full 3D game for the first time. I was too young for the cultural revolution that was the original Virtua Fighter in arcades, but a game like Super Mario 64 in 1996 was so dramatically different from the stuff I had been playing up to that point that I thought video games would never be the same again. Quake maybe doesn't directly play into that feeling, but the sheer impact its 3D visuals had on guiding the direction of gaming as a medium cannot be overstated. I didn't play Quake when it was brand new, however. Since Doom and even Duke Nukem 3D were the games that kickstarted my interest in the PC space around circa 1998, it would be a few years till I got around to Quake. I have vague recollections of some girl in elementary school showing me her father's boxes for Quake 1 and 2, but I wouldn't play the game proper until middle school. I met a friend there who was very much into PC games, and even had a networked setup in his house for his brother and dad to play with him. They would partake of LAN parties, and obviously, Quake was the supreme champion of deathmatch games. Well, maybe Quake 3 Arena was, but Quake had its own charm that hasn't really been replicated since. At that point, I sought out a copy of my own and wound up getting the Quake Trilogy Pack. It was really the only way I could find the first game despite already owning Quake 2 and 3 on their own. I mostly used it to deathmatch over the internet with my new friend, but I dabbled with the campaign a little. The music left a tremendous impression on me, though most people would say the same thing. Having Nine Inch Nails score your game at the height of their prominence is one of those facts that seems impossible in retrospect. Before I ever finished the main campaign, I remember playing with my cousin and his friend during one of our family Thanksgiving get-togethers. This was probably around 2003, which means I had been playing Quake for a few years at least. He was big into nerdy stuff, specifically Dungeons & Dragons, but also had been an avid gamer after returning from the Navy in the early 90s. Since I had a new laptop, it was really easy to get some LAN play going, and we fragged each other all night long. It's also where I first learned that the lightning gun will kill everything in the same pool of water that it's shot in. So when I did finally complete the single-player portion of Quake, I began to wonder why id Software never followed up on it. I know Quake 2 is technically a continuation, but it's more like a continuation in terms of technology. You can make the case that all of id Software's games had been technology-first endeavors, but games such as Commander Keen, Doom, and even Quake have impressive and well-thought-out mechanics to match their technological prowess. Quake 2 feels more like id Software spinning its wheels, which turns out to be exactly the case. I didn't know it back then, but Quake was the collapse of that original id Software team. The story is old hat by now, and wonderfully documented in the book Masters of Doom by David Kushner, but after John Romero and Sandy Peterson left, id Software would never really be the same again. Tom Hall's departure before the original Doom should have been a sign of things to come. Sure, the games were still good following Quake, if not outright great, but that simultaneous pushing of technology alongside thoughtful design was lost. I think I understood that as a teenager, but couldn't really externalize it. When Doom 3 released in 2004, I was one of the vocal haters online. Having been raised on Quake and the like, Doom 3 felt like an abandonment of the joys that Quake was bringing me. It was slower, more cramped, and full of lackluster guns in a fashion that I didn't think id Software could manage. Conversely, Quake was lightning fast, had very vertical levels with lots of nooks and crannies, and contained an almost perfect arsenal of guns that remained useful at every point. I do think having a super shotgun and super nail gun are a little redundant, but Quake just feels so good. Even after replaying it for the sake of footage on this retrospective, I'm still in love with how Quake feels. I might have other classic shooters I enjoy more, like Unreal, but Quake really does give you the impression of piloting a Deathbringer on ice skates. That's not to say movement is slippery, just that you can perform all kinds of quick movements as if you've mastered the act of walking and are bending it to your will. The amount of control put into the player's hands is probably why the game has endured for 3 decades, with fans still clamoring for a proper sequel. The only game that really comes close is Dusk. Sadly, I never got into the modding scene with Quake, but I do know it was a massively important title for making multiplayer a must-have feature in the following generation. Landmark games such as Team Fortress Classic wouldn't exist without Quake. Even the highly revered Half-Life would be a shell of what it released as, if not for id Software's technical breakthroughs. Quake changed the game, literally, and has influenced so many 3D applications that we may never be able to document its true impact. It's also remained a fixture in my life since I first played it. I might go a few years without touching it, but I always come back to Quake. When I landed my first full-time job at a supermarket, I connected with one of my coworkers over classic shooters. As you could guess, Quake was a big topic of discussion. When I was working at a homeless shelter some years later, I fiddled around with Doom during the off hours, and that eventually led to booting Quake on PCs woefully under-equipped to run it. At E3 2019, I met John Romero and had him sign my copy of Quake. A couple years past that, Night Dive Studios somehow got the license to produce that incredible remaster, which then became my preferred version of Quake. That version let me introduce the game to my high school friend, who never got around to playing it in the 15 years I had known him at that point. I feel like I haven't done a great job conveying why Quake is important, but what else can I truly write about the game? There are bound to be hundreds of retrospectives posted today that will recount its development history or throw out superlatives to remind current owner Microsoft why they should be doing something with the IP. That's the part where this story takes a sad turn. id Software would be sold to ZeniMax in 2009, which brought it under Bethesda's control. Then in 2021, Microsoft would acquire ZeniMax and bring it under its Xbox Game Studios banner. Maybe I don't need to outline why that sucks, but it has informed the direction of my work for the last few years. As per the BDS movement, Microsoft is included on its boycott list because of its complicity with the ongoing Palestinian genocide. Microsoft has been providing its Azure cloud and AI services that have been instrumental in Israel's ongoing slaughter of innocents. While Microsoft would cut access to some of its service from the Israeli government in September 2025, and even fire the head of Microsoft Israel in May 2026, it has not fully divested itself from aiding the Israeli government. Talking about anything Microsoft related, even a game as old as Quake, means indirectly supporting that. I'm a little torn even doing this whole retrospective. Initially, I planned on skipping it entirely, but a viewer commented on my Duke Nukem 3D retrospective that he hoped I would do one for Quake to celebrate the game. Quake is important enough to warrant me praising it, but doing so indirectly praises Microsoft. After giving it some thought, I chose to highlight Quake simply because it's a reminder of what indie games can achieve. Maybe that seems weird to call it such now, but id Software was indie in the 90s. Long before it was making deals with Activision or having games published by Bethesda, the guys at id were college graduates hungry to make a name for themselves. Through sheer force of talent and will, they created an empire that dominated the PC scene in a few short years. The team managed to turn computers into a viable gaming platform, not to mention experimented with things like digital distribution, episodic gaming, and fully 3D graphics well before they were industry standards. They did all of that while Microsoft was still fumbling with pushing Windows into the mainstream. Quake may belong to Microsoft now, but Microsoft did not create Quake. It didn't even popularize it. So for that reason, I'm happy to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the game, despite where it may currently rest. Maybe this goes against my own stance of not covering Microsoft's garbage, but Quake is bigger than any corporation. 30 years from now, we'll still be talking about Quake. Microsoft might not last past the AI bubble. Hopefully in the future, Quake can live again and from outside of Microsoft's grasp. Until that day comes, we'll always have this original beast of a game to play.